Hi YouTube, welcome to the channel. So today I just wanted to cover three more questions that I've been asked on social media pertaining to divorce and remarriage. So the first question I wanted to answer was if Jesus doesn't allow for divorce and remarriage, why didn't he say something to the woman who had five husbands? So in John 4:18, Jesus says to the woman, you are right when you say you haven't got a husband because you've had five husbands. So I was asked, so why didn't he tell her if remarriage is actually adultery? Surely he would have mentioned that to her at that time. So as I've been praying about this and reading the Bible and cross-referencing the verses, I believe the Lord has been sort of showing me what was going on here. So the main thrust of this passage is that Jesus wants the woman to see who he is, to recognize that he's Messiah, to recognize who he is. So that's his main priority here. So in the other verses where we see him mentioning that remarriage is adultery, so all the other times that he mentions remarriage, he calls it adultery. So he'd already been asked questions then about the marriage situation. So this is Jesus for you. He generally meets people where they are, and he has a different purpose for each person when he's in conversation with them. So he hadn't directly been asked that by this woman. He hadn't been asked about divorce and remarriage. The other thing is that because she'd come to the well at midday, she already was seen as a scarlet woman within her society, because a woman would only have to go to the well at that time if she was like an outcast in society. So Jesus would have already known her heart, and he would have known that she knew her position in society, and that she was looked down on, and that she was considered like a sinner probably. So he mentioned the five marriages in a negative way. He didn't say, wow, you've been married five times. He mentioned it in a negative way, like, you've been married five times. And she knew that herself, and he knew she knew that. So these are some of the reasons why he didn't perhaps broach the subject of divorce and remarriage directly to her. Also, the word for husbands here, you've had five husbands, it's the word for man, and it's actually used more as translated as man than it's translated as husband. So he could have been saying to her, I know you've had five men, like you've lived with five men, and the man you have now is not your husband. And there's also the possibility that she had been married and divorced five times. There's also the possibility that she'd married five husbands and they'd all died. And also, Jesus had been telling people that divorce and remarriage was adultery. He'd been taking people back to Genesis, back to the original design of marriage, one man, one woman for life. He'd been doing that. But it might not have been well known at that time when he was talking to that woman, because Moses had allowed for divorce for the hardness of people's hearts. So he was talking to her in her language. So he was basically saying she'd been legally married. So he may have just been talking to her in her language. Yeah, she'd been legally married. It didn't mean he was condoning the behaviour. He was just stating facts to her. And like I said in the beginning, I feel like when I was praying and seeking God on these verses, I feel like he was showing me that the thrust of these passages, that Jesus wanted to reveal himself to her. She already knew she was a sinner. She already knew what she'd done. He didn't need to bring that up with her. So that was the main thrust of the passages, and this is why I think that he perhaps didn't mention that divorce and remarriage is adultery. So the next question was on 1 Corinthians 7:10, and it's where Paul says, so if she does separate from her husband, she must remain unmarried or be reconciled. And I was asked that if this passage says that she should remain unmarried, so that must mean that the divorce has ended the marriage. But when you look at the word in Greek, basically it means that you shouldn't remarry. So what the verse is actually saying is you shouldn't go and get remarried. You should remain, although you are in the eyes of God married in God's eyes, but you're going to have to live single as you're single, aren't you? Not so that you go and have relationships, but that you're going to have to live as a single person, and you should not get married. So basically this verse is saying, if you're divorced, don't go and get married again. Don't go and get married. Remain unmarried. So don't go and get married again. I think this is what the verse is trying to say, and it's obvious from the other verses Corinthians and Romans and the Gospels that remarriage is adultery. So it's clear that, you know, if you're divorced from a covenant marriage, you're going to have to stay single, or reconcile, which is what the verse actually is saying. Yes, I don't think it doesn't mean that you're no longer seen as married in God's eyes if you're divorced. It just means that you shouldn't go and get married again. Basically, you need to stay single, live a single celibate life until your covenant spouse dies or you die. So I've also been asked, are there modern day eunuchs? And I would say yes, there are. So in Matthew 19:9, we see where Jesus says that divorce and remarriage is adultery. And then a few verses later in Matthew 19:12, we hear that Jesus says some are made eunuchs by others and some choose to live like eunuchs for the kingdom's sake. Well, if you're made a eunuch by others, so basically if you're divorced against your will, you're being made a eunuch, aren't you? Because you can't get remarried because it'll be adultery, so you have to live as a eunuch. And then the following verse, you choose to live like eunuchs for the kingdom's sake. So I guess that's what I'm doing. Number one, I've been made a eunuch because my covenant husband's remarried, so I have to live single and celibate. And number two, choose to live like eunuchs for the kingdom's sake. So I would sort of argue with that a bit, because I don't think I chose to live like this. This wouldn't be what I would choose in my flesh, I guess, but in my spirit, I guess I have in a way chosen to live this way for Jesus. You know, it's a sacrifice, isn't it? So it's laying down what you want, laying down your will, and putting God's will first, because I'm just a normal person who would obviously like to be in a relationship if it was right in God's eyes. But if I can't be in the right relationship, i.e. with my covenant husband, my second choice would be like to live like this, to live as a eunuch, because ultimately I'm more interested in the next life than this. I'm more interested in being obedient to God now, no matter what the cost, than I am in fulfilling whatever desires I feel like I might have for companionship in this life, you know. So that would be my answer to that question. Yeah, I do believe that there are modern day eunuchs, and there are people that have been made eunuchs because of the situation they're in that's not in their control, that they have to remain single because their covenant spouse, like number one, doesn't want them back. And also they probably have remarried as well, so there is no choice. We have to live as eunuchs and for the sake of God. So yeah, they're the three other questions that I was asked over the past couple of weeks. I just wanted to answer them today. And yeah, if you want to leave any comments below and ask any more questions, I'll do my best to answer them. So thanks for watching.